Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you're watching this. Here we are again for another installment, a quick sort of overview, video review of the modules, Module 9 and 10 in particular, one on the Scottish Enlightenment and the other on Karl Marx and the Age of Revolution. But before doing that, I'd like to go into do a quick deep dive of the topics that we have available for the second essay, which will be due on Sunday, the 6th of August, 2023, 11:59 p.m. Okay, so that's what I'd like to start with here. And the first thing here is going back to week 8, or it'd be module 4. According to Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the social contract is designed to lessen some of the inherent problems encountered by individuals in a state of nature. The question becomes, what is the essence of a social contract? What does it consist of? How does it work? Are all contracts by all three thinkers exactly the same? Are there some differences? What are those differences? And in your opinion, who has a better understanding of the human need for a social contract? Is it Thomas Hobbes, who believes in absolute power, the absolute monarchy, or John Locke or Rousseau, who are quite similar in their thinking in that a democratic system is better, one where there's an opportunity to not overthrow through revolution, but overthrow through a voting system, a party or a government that really does not represent the people. So that's the first one. Second, also from week 8, Jean-Jacques Rousseau has very clear ideas about the limits of political power. This is a very important aspect in his work. And the fact that force does not give a government moral authority to oppress its people. In other words, just because you've got the guns doesn't mean your way is the right way. It just means that people will listen only because they fear for their lives. Is that moral? No. Why? Because there is no choice. If we say no, we end up getting jailed. So, what kind of an effect does physical force have on the morality of an individual, such as I've just described? Is Rousseau correct in arguing that yielding to force is an act of necessity and self-preservation and not a free will? Which, if there is no will that's being enacted upon and no choice, therefore it is unethical. So, if citizens must obey by force, is there any need to obey because of duty? In other words, duty is something we ought to do. In other words, ought we to obey a government that is telling us to behave in a certain way by force, right, by threats? Okay, number 3. The Scottish Enlightenment, that's the group we're going to look at today, was a period in 18th century Scottish intellectual life characterized by the remarkable production of intellectual and scientific accomplishments. However, social, political, and cultural events were needed to establish the possibility of free thought and expression. What were those changes, and how did they interact with one another to create the European Enlightenment in general and the Scottish Enlightenment in particular? These are all the changes that we have discussed over the last 4 modules in particular. First of all, the idea of a social contract, the idea that absolute power may not be the way to go, or the idea that the citizen or the subject should have a say in the running of everyday affairs, that the governments up to that point, government usually in the case of the church, were basically not even bothering to ask for consensus. They just went ahead and did it. So what are the things that changed in society and politics and culture to allow for the Enlightenment to come into being? The pushback from science, the pushback from moral philosophy, from philosophy in general, a return to empirical thinking rather than idealist or rational thinking. These are all aspects that influence the way in which the Enlightenment was able to come about and express its ideas. A reduction in censorship, an increase in the ability to publish information, publish works, right? The Gutenberg press, for example, is very important. So what were all the different things that came together to allow and set the stage for not only the Enlightenment in general across Western Europe, but the Scottish Enlightenment in particular? So number 5, Ludwig Feuerbach, that's how you pronounce it, Ludwig Feuerbach, argues that traditional religion and philosophy are radically flawed and should be replaced with a new form of philosophy that will usher in an era of human emancipation. So how does this theory promise to redeem the human spirit? What does it consist of? what makes philosophy, or the philosophy of the future, as he called it, what makes it different than religion? How would the elimination of all forms of consciousness, religious or philosophical, help humanity to realize its own true spiritual grandeur? This is something we're going to look at today. Feuerbach, basically what he argues is religion has blinded us to the true nature of ourselves. All of the attributes that we give to this Godhead, this entity, this spiritual entity that we can never know directly but simply know of, really is us. We are talking about ourselves, but we project those positive attributes to a being that may or may not exist. And Feuerbach says, no, we've basically held ourselves back by thinking that somehow we cannot be perfect beings. And he says, absolutely we can, through love and mutual respect and communications and community. All of these different aspects that he talks about will create a new world that is respectful of one another, filled with love, a new understanding of the potential, right, the capacity of human beings to be the best that they can. That's kind of what Feuerbach is talking about. And especially the notion of community is important because, remember, he's writing on the tail end of hundreds of years of religious wars where one group is pitted against another and trying to decide, whose religion is better. And Feuerbach says, no, this is dangerous, right? We should all embrace the fact that we can be perfect beings. So that's essentially his argument. Okay, number 6, and again, we're going to talk about this today. In his development of transformational criticism, Karl Marx argues that Wesen, right, human essence, the divine part of human nature, this is an idea that he borrows from Feuerbach, is being destroyed by the Industrial Revolution in general and by capitalism in particular. We're being crushed by these two entities, these two institutions, and our essence, our divine nature, is being replaced by this sort of mechanical view of the world as somehow we're a cog in a wheel, right? The division of labor is literally the way we live now. So alienated labor estranges individuals from their divine nature, their life activity, their own species being, and even other individuals. So the question is, what are some of the strategies used by modern industrial capitalism to minimize the alienation of workers? So we're thinking through Marx and hopefully coming out the other side, dealing with alienation and asking ourselves, has modern capitalism dealt with the alienation of workers? And if so, how? How have they done it? So minimizing the alienation of workers and restoring and integrating that human nature that we have. Has it been successful? So there are different arguments depending on your point of view and where you're coming from politically or in terms of your personal interest. Business students can engage with this question and come up with things that are very different than, for example, a philosopher may come up with. But either way, it's not a wrong or right answer. It's how you kind of think through the notion of alienation and what it looks like these days. Number 7. In her book, The Second Sex, written in 1949, Simone de Beauvoir argues that woman has been forced to occupy a secondary place in relation to man, in society, for example, in politics, and that this unequal position is reinforced by educational and social traditions. Now, remember the date, writing in 1949 in France, this would have been quite radical because French women had only received the vote in, I think, either 1946 or 48. So they were not even able to participate in the activities, the political activities of France until after the Second World War. So in 1949, these were bold statements that women were forced. In other words, it was institutional sexism is what it was. And so if that is so, what does she mean when she states, this is Beauvoir, what does she mean when she states, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman? How does this provocative phrase support her argument that social roles are gendered and defined by one's sex rather than one's skill or intellect? So in other words, in post-war France, there were gender roles that were expected to be occupied by women and gender roles that were expected to be occupied by men. Because of institutionalized sexism, it became extremely difficult for women to break out of these gendered roles, these traditional roles that really were hugely limiting to women in France. Now, different versions of this have existed in other parts of the world, but it's an exploration into gender roles and gender relations. So these ideas were presented in 1949, and thankfully the world has progressed, but we can still think through gender roles and see them either being demolished these days or some being reconstituted differently. Basically, the question is, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. In other words, a woman is not born into those gender roles, and therefore they can be broken, but rather becomes or grows into these gender roles. So again, it's a provocative statement. What do you make of it? Have we progressed past 1949 and Beauvoir's idea that a woman becomes a woman in society rather than is born as one? Number 8, also from week 11, unlike second wave mid-century feminism, third wave late 20th century feminists define themselves around issues of sexuality, class, and race. So you can pick a third wave feminist, Bell Hooks, Naomi Wolf, Becky Thompson. Choice is yours. There are many, many of them. Along with a topic covered in this course, for example, third wave feminism and monotheism, or the Industrial Revolution, or Marxism, or psychoanalysis, whatever it may be, Orientalism, fundamentalism, all these things are part of your sort of exploration of what third wave feminism is all about. And so describe some of the main ideas held by feminists of your choice from that particular wave, and then apply, or at least understand how they apply critically to the course topic of your choice. So you have a choice as to which ism, for example, you'd like to look at, monotheism, Marxism, whatever, and then think of a third wave feminist thinker and see how they engage with, let's say, alienation, gender roles, sexism. So whatever it may be, it's entirely up to you. Question 9 here. Actually, there's 2 more from question 12 on Orientalism. So Edward Said's second meaning of Orientalism, slide 6 from module 12, he states that it is a, quote, style of thought based upon an ontological and epistemological distinction between the Orient and the Occidental. So ontology is a study of being, the existence of human beings, and epistemology is an understanding of the development of knowledge. How do we gain knowledge? How do we know that what we know is true? How can we prove that? So it's a style of thought based on ways of being and ways of thinking, and that distinction, right, between the Orient and the Occident. So what does he mean? What does he mean by that? Ways of being regarding the Orient and ways of being and thinking about the Occidental world, right, which is our world in Western Europe, North America. So what is the meaning of ontological? What is the meaning of epistemological? I just gave it to you. How could a, quote, style of thought, right, a form of epistemology, it's a mouthful, be based on ontological or epistemological distinctions? Is Orientalism merely a point of view? Is it also a value judgment? Which, short answer, yes. Yes, it is. Very much so. Number 10. In the Introduction to Orientalism, written in 1978, Said describes the Orient as, quote, a European invention. So the Orient, the other half of the world, is actually a European invention. And Orientalism as, quote, a way of coming to terms with the Orient. So what does Said mean by this distinction? One is geographical, one may be cultural. What does Said make this distinction? Like, why does he make it in the first place? What is he actually trying to tell us? Is one more real than the other? So is a geographical Orient more real or simply different than the kind of cultural Orientalism that Said is talking about? So this could be a very rich essay because Said's book, although written in 1978, is still so important because it identifies for the first time a point of view that is a value-laden and an uncritical view of another group of people. And of course, those that decide what Orientalism is, oh, surprise, they happen to be the colonizers, right? Colonizers of minds, colonizers of nations, colonizers of political structures. So we in the Occidental world call the shots. We decide what is the Orient, what does it consist of. So you've got question 9 and 10 where you can sort of work through some of this material. Now, because we've gone on for 15 minutes already, you could also look at some of the issues regarding fundamentalism. Now, again, it's up to you. You can take a look at fundamentalism, whether it's Islamic or Judaic or Christian, because all three of them have fundamentalist sects. And for example, what is happening in the U.S., for example, this notion of Christian nationalism, that is really terrifying, because Christian nationalism segues rather nicely into systemic racism, in white supremacy, in a very right-wing, extreme right-wing ideology that when you read the slides in the last module on fundamentalism, you'll see why it is so terrifying. Okay, so those are the topics. As I mentioned before, students reserve the right to 1, devise their own original topics, or 2, modify the essay topic described above. All asked for you to do is, if you come up with an original one, please email me as soon as possible to let me know what it is and to make sure that it can fit into an essay that's only 1,000 to 1,200 words. So you're looking at about 4 pages, 5 maximum, so not really a whole lot of room. So your essay is going to be in document format or PDF. Will be due in the Dropbox by Sunday, August 6th. 3 or 4 pages, double-spaced, using APA or MLA formatting. If you write in the Chicago style, you can do that too. Type your essay in a normal 11 or 12 font, normal size margins, but it has to be double spaced. I know this is a business school and an applied sciences school, but I kind of prefer double spaced because I just find it easier to read. That's all. Marking. Essay will be marked on how well you present the course material, the position you may have chosen. Let's say you're writing about third wave feminist thought. State that position clearly, what that thinker, who that philosopher or that sociologist, what that person is saying before applying it to the argument that you wish to look at. If you're going to look at my PowerPoints, you can quote them in the following manner here. In-text citations, it would be Matthews, title of the module, the module number. I keep writing week, but it's actually module number, and then the slide number. Now that's in-text citation. Works cited page, you can write Matthews, Edward. Week 4, Concepts of the Self and the Citizen, for example, Fanshawe College, 2016, 2023. I've taught this course on and off since 2016. That's why it says that. But I change my slides all the time. So don't write 2016, write 2023, because that is the most recent version. And finally, the last thing here, because this is a research essay, 50% of the mark will be a reflection of your sources, how good they are, how you make use of them, how you fit them into your in-text citations, how you work through arguments that are supported, your position is supported by the readings, or you may critique them, you may contradict them and say Said says something, or one of the feminists that I'm studying says something, or Marx, whoever. You can still contradict them, absolutely. But again, make sure you state your position clearly. So 50% will be how well you use your sources. What do they consist of? How do you use them? And 50% will be basically the kind of formal aspects, the writing style, the structure, the grammar, proper MLA and APA citation. And that's really about it. So do use the suggested weekly reading list, which I placed at the end of each of the modules. Many of those books are available either as PowerPoints or maybe some chapters available online. And so they're downloadable. And if you use them, make sure that you use them as if they were the book, because PDFs will have, for example, let's say it's an essay out of a journal and the first page of the PDF might be page 43. Well, maybe the first page of the PDF, but the comment and the idea that you took is on page 43. So just make sure to do that. So that's basically it. If you have any questions, please make sure you contact me right away.